Welcome to the Emergent Human, where we explore optimizing health, embodied spirituality, and post-conventional living. I'm Michael Osterlink, a therapist, coach, and educator, and I'm your host. Today's show is brought to you by Somatic Psychotherapy Today. You can learn more about Somatic Psychotherapy Today by visiting their website at somaticspsychotherapytoday.com. Today's guest I'm very excited for is Dr. Roger Jahnke. He's a Oriental medicine doctor, is one of the most respected luminaries in the fields of evidence-based mind-body practices, wellness, and integrative medicine, and Chinese medicine for self-transformation. He has dedicated his professional life to sharing the ancient holistic empowerment and healing traditions of China, distilled for contemporary times. As a director and chief instructor of the Institute of Integral, Qigong, and Tai Chi in Santa Barbara, California, he and his IIQTC colleagues have trained over 3,000 Tai Chi and Qigong teachers and practice leaders internationally. With 35 years of clinical practice as a physician of acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine, and 10 years research tours in China's temples and sacred mountain sites, he has emerged as a key spokesman for and master teacher of Tai Chi, Qigong, and mind-body practices. He's written 2 books. The first, The Healer Within, using traditional Chinese techniques to release your body's own medicine. And his second book is Healing Promise of Qi, Creating Extraordinary Wellness Through Qigong and Tai Chi. Welcome, Roger.
Michael, good to see you again.
It's very good to see you as well, my friend. And wow, you've trained lots of people. You've been in the field for an awful long time. You've written 2 books. You have your own institute. That's a lot of work you've done. But I'm very curious, Roger, like, how did you first learn about Chinese medicine? How did you get involved in Chinese medicine, or just wellness in general, Chinese medicine in particular?
Yeah, so I'm from a place called Ohio, and the only thing that I knew about Chinese anything was that when I went to college, there was a Chinese restaurant which I loved to go to. And I studied at the University of Cincinnati in pre-med.
Okay.
And one of the things that happened to me there is that I was, well, and I'll tell you why. My dad died when I was 10 years old. And so I was mystified by the fact that this seemingly well person just slipped away. And people would say, things like only the good die young and platitude on platitude. But before that, I would always say, I want to be a baseball player because Cincinnati has a fantastic baseball team sometimes. And after my dad died, when people would ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I shifted my story to say, I want to be a doctor. And so went to pre-medical school. And what happened there was that I asked the question, because it was traditional in my family, to seek a mentor. I asked the question, is there someone here who understands disease prevention? We didn't even say anything like wellness or,
Yeah.
biohacking or anything like that. We just said disease prevention. And the comeback from more than one person was, no, we're doctors. We diagnose and treat disease.
Mm.
If you want to study well-being, you have to do some. Actually, I had one person say, you should study home economics.
Wow.
And, in the 1960s,
Mhm.
in high school, you would
Oh,
study home economics. As a kid, like I went to a home economics class where we would learn how to do ironing and
mm.
cooking and all kinds of cool, in gardening, by the way. Anyway, it was 1967. I
Mm.
was smoking a carload of pot. I was growing my hair down to the sidewalk. I was burning my draft card. And so I quit. I dropped out of medical school and I got into comparative world literature, where the first book that we read was the Tao Te Ching.
Oh, wow.
And number 10, anybody who wants to look this up, do it. The first couple of phrases in the Tao Te Ching, number 10, is, can you still your mind and become aware of the unitary nature of the universe? Then it says, can you use your breath and your body to sustain the suppleness of a newborn with no cares? And I thought to myself, okay, this is it. I want to be a doctor of this. And so I studied Chinese medicine. I had the very, very fortunate opportunity to move to Hawaii, where I studied Chinese medicine with an amazing physician there who was starting an institute in 1972, and because it was a very traditional school of Chinese medicine, I learned a lot about the interface between not so much clinical practice and health recovery, though that was certainly there with acupuncture and herbal medicine and so forth, but we were very focused on the interface between personal behavior and health maximization, as well as disease recovery. So the underlying foundation of Chinese medicine, which I just love, is the fact that it's all about activating naturally occurring self-maximizing mechanisms within the human system. In other words, it's all here. And even acupuncture is intended to arrange what's already here. And herbal medicine is intended to nourish what's already here. So the bottom line, and this will be my last sentence, is that the most profound medicine is produced within the human system. And we could even say produced within the human system for no cost, because a person, a consumer, a citizen can turn these mechanisms on. I mean, it takes a little training, and it takes a little inspiration, and it takes a little, here's everybody's least favorite, it takes a little discipline, but it's possible to actually activate a myriad, an uncountable, the humans don't even know how the human actually works yet. And so we can turn these things on by using insights that were uncovered by people before the written language of any of the cultures in the world.
Which is amazing to consider that it's, thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. That's just amazing. And for people to subjectively experience and then map the different energetic systems in the body, it's just amazing to consider how they were able to accomplish that.
Well, I
And then
love your
teach it.
word subjective there, because we, in the modern world, we have become prisoners of this idea that subjective insight is not science.
Yeah,
And actually, just to take a few moments,
please.
the word science has always meant to observe. And when I went to school, and maybe when you went to school, we learned that originally scientists were called natural philosophers. Natural philosophers. So, what is philosophy? But just opinions about the nature of the world. And here's another really interesting about science. If you put it together with the root or modifier con, conscience, conscience means with science. So conscience really means to progress oneself relative to what one has observed. And of course, it really means that we're observing. And what happens to modern people is they just listen to these people called scientists who may or may not actually be reflecting what one is observing.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, at least my experiences with Chinese medicine is it's subjective, intersubjective, and objective. I mean, there are things that are empirical and can be measured. There are things that are very subjective, and there's exchanges between people in terms of meaning making, which is just amazing to consider.
Indeed.
Um, yeah, but before we jump into the human system and how the Chinese medicine philosophy looks at it and helps individuals optimize it, even without exogenous things supporting it, although we can talk about herbs and acupuncture as well. I'm curious about you, Roger. Who was the Roger before you studied Chinese medicine formally? And who's the Roger who came out of that school?
Yeah. The Roger, so we're going to high school here. I was a traumatized youth. My family was beautiful. My dad was just an amazing human being. He was a Marine. He taught me how to hunt. Uh, I have a really interesting story about hunting. I'll just tell it now, and that is that I killed a rabbit. After my dad died, I did a lot of hunting, and on a very pristine, snowy morning, I went out hunting with my bow and arrow, and I killed a rabbit. And as I walked up to it, this is right after my dad died, and I saw the blood flowing out onto this white snow. I had this epiphany that I had just killed the father of some little bunny children. And it was extremely upsetting to me because it was a clash between the power of being a hunter and the power of being someone who was traumatized by the early demise of a parent. And it really had a huge influence on me, which drove me into things like running away from home, smoking cigarettes at 12 years old, uh, being extremely shy, and in high school I was a kind of like a wallflower kind of character. I got, medium level grades. I was just basically a below average person. I actually had the experience of being kicked off of the basketball team.
Wow.
It was just like, pile on, pile on, pile on. And so that was me. And very unsure about pretty much everything. And at this point, after going to the school of life, having a very uncomfortable divorce, and a few other, kind of depressing experiences, I really locked on. By the way, my first yoga class was in 1963. I was inducted, or whatever they call it, into Transcendental meditation the same year as the Beatles and the same year as Herbert Benson from Harvard.
Yeah.
And I found my way into a relationship with Alan Watts. And Alan Watts was always referring to this. Can you see that?
I can. Yeah.
That is, we call that the yin yang symbol, but it's actually, that's not its name in Chinese, in the Chinese language. The name of that is Tai Chi 2. Tai Chi 2. 2 means map. Tai Chi means the duality, like the highest, most first principle level of duality, which spills into the dimensional world from another realm called Wu Ji. So you got Taiji and Wu Ji. Wu Ji means cosmic oneness, no time, no space, boundlessness, and Tai Chi means time and space and weight and light and darkness, and all these dualities that make up our lives. So Alan Watts, bless his soul, he really leveraged me up into reading the Tao Te Ching, which I just quoted from number 10, which is a very, very powerful one. But the Tao Te Ching is just 81 amazing short sutras, if you want to call them, or texts on the nature of the world and the nature of life. And I think that the ultimate, Michael, is, we all seek to cook this down into the shortest sentence we possibly can so that we can remember it from moment to moment. And my favorite sentence from all the great Chinese texts, which goes all the way back to probably 2,000, maybe 2,500 years ago, says this. This is so amazing. It says, first sentence, "The secret is acceptance." Then the second sentence says, "Your capacity to develop or cultivate acceptance will be revealed as a dazzling spiritual energy." And then the third sentence says that when you cultivate this capacity to accept what you cannot control, it brings peace to the world. So now the question is, if I accept everything that arises that I can't control, will I create peace in what we see in the dimensional world, or will I create peace in my world? Because as you know, everybody is in a world. Some people call it a personal life world, a personal life world. And so I know for sure that when I have cultivated this capacity to sustain a sense, and not for every moment and not for every experience, but as much as possible, to sustain a capacity for noticing, can I control this? Doesn't look like it. Okay, accept it. And then to experience how that proliferates into my world as peace. And of course, if I'm at peace, then the whole world is also incrementally more at peace as well.
I'd like to ask you that because so you do practices. I mean, you actually teach Tai Chi and Qigong, or practices to embody what I'm hearing you say. But from my understanding of the Chinese system, that there are the certain organs are connected to emotions, as an example. And I would love for you to just kind of touch upon that and how the Chinese system is energetic, psychological, physical, metaphysical. I mean, it kind of integrates all these different things, and maybe we could use kind of emotions as a segue in. And before you, if that's okay with you, but before you do, I just want to share one thing with you. I didn't have the privilege and honor of spending time with Alan Watts. I'm really cool to hear that you did, but I did have the opportunity to work for his son when I was in grad school, transcribing his father's lectures. And I got to say, listening to his father and typing them up wasn't as good as being with his father, but it's probably the second best thing I could imagine.
Yeah,
really cool.
Amazing. And allow me to say, just for the record and to keep things clear, I did not have the great fortune of being in the presence of Alan Watts.
Just studying with him.
I was just reading his books in high school. And and we had numerous near misses at the Esalen Institute. But so you and I are pretty much in same proximity to the man.
Okay, very cool. Cool. Thanks for the clarification, but still awesome. Reading Alan Watts in high school. Yeah, that's very cool.
You had to be desperate, right? I mean, if you had to be desperate to read Alan Watts, why? Because if you weren't desperate, you were a hero. You were an admired athlete. you were a
Mm-hmm.
scholar of things that have to do with high school. So I was none of those. So I was forced into these alternative
Yeah,
universes for which I now have just humbling gratitude.
yeah, that's awesome. It's almost we can be thankful, and I'm sorry for your loss, of course, for your father, but thankful for the challenges you faced and the way you faced them, because that produced the man that you are today, and affecting all the lives that you have affected and will continue to affect. So
Yeah,
there's like a
amen.
blessing
And
within that.
there's the acceptance right there.
Yeah, yeah. So using more psychological entry points to talk about the Chinese medicine system, if that's okay with you, organs, emotions,
Sure.
those kind of things.
Yeah. So how this all works is that if we go historic uh, to origin, and then fast forward through dynastic periods of time, what happens is that profound, ancient, subjective insights become deranged through political dogma,
Mhm,
unfortunately.
mhm.
And it just happens. I mean, the collapse of the American society is showing that right now. You know, we have this great 1776, and then everybody sort of splits off into their, I'm a angry person, I'm a poor person, you're a bad person, you're the elite, the greedy people, all that stuff. And pretty soon it's like the Greeks, it's like the Romans, it's like the Egyptians, it's like the Tang Dynasty Chinese. When the weight of political impulse overcomes the natural insights of free spirits, uh, things fall apart. So why I'm saying that is that so much of what Chinese medicine became is actually kind of corrupted. Fortunately, the extent to which that corruption has a negative impact is pretty low. And here's why. Because you can put an acupuncture needle almost anywhere and get some kind of a benefit. Why is that? Well, because a person is lying down, now you're putting pins in them, and where are they going to go? And so it's basically a period of forced relaxation. Then what happens is many acupuncturists will leave you alone for a while and even put on some lovely music. And so now you're pinned down, you're relaxing in a way that you hardly ever do, plus there's some kind of, I'm just going to say, irritant that has been pushed through the skin to turn on a whole array of, shall we say, naturally occurring mechanisms, everything from what we could call the self-regulatory capacity that has to do with the neurological system, but also when you put a needle into a body, there's a healing response which is mobilized immediately, which is different than the neurological response. And then there's the potential of a energetic response, which has to do with the acupuncture needles being some kind of, shall we say, antennas for ambient cosmological energies to have an influence on internal energies. So there's a lot going on there. So what I'm saying is that the body of knowledge, even though it became dogmatic and then changed per dynasty, because just like when the Republicans get into the White House, all the Democrats have to leave. When a new emperor comes into a Chinese dynasty, all the old dynasty either leave or are slaughtered. And so then they reinvent everything to adjust to the political whims of the new party. So we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what happened originally, which was that the ancient indigenous shamanic wizards of these things, the people who cared about caring for the human mind, body, spirit, came up with a a paradigm called the three treasures. And the three treasures have a Chinese words and so forth that go with them, but let's keep it simple, and we'll talk about it as the treasure of the physical self, the treasure of the mental emotional self, and the treasure of the transcendental presence. So we'll just use the Greek holistic ideal of body, mind, spirit. So acupuncture, herbal medicine, Qigong, meditation, and Kung Fu and Tai Chi, all of those are rooted in this idea that well-being is maximized by integrating the three treasures. So how do we integrate the body, the mind, and the spirit? And let's use your idea of coming in from the emotional self. So we'll call the mind both the intellectual mind, which is our knowledge base and our assumptions, and then we have the emotional mind. And by the way, in the Chinese tradition, the mind and the heart are one thing. And this goes all the way back to the origins of Chinese language and still means the same thing today. So when we hear Chinese people, whatever a Chinese person said, translated as heart, it really means heart, mind. And I'm using these two hands because the mind is one part of the mental emotional self, and the emotions is another part of the emotional self. And one of the things that I learned from my two favorite Native American shamans way back in the 1960s was when they would sing songs and prayers, there would always be a phrase at the end of a paragraph of song or prayer that went like this: and now the heart and the mind are one. And now the heart and the mind are one. So the Chinese language reflects this idea that the feeling self and the intellectual self are in a relationship. So the entry point for any kind of, shall we say, I don't want to say intervention because that's medical, but let's just call it a practice. The entry point for, let's say, nutrition. The entry point for sleep. The entry point for performance. There's going to be a body component to performance. There's going to be a mental emotional component to performance. And then there's going to be this mysterious transcendental feature to anything: nourishment, sleep, performance, etc. How does that work? Well, think to yourself. You go to a workshop, it says, nutrition. At the end of the workshop, you say, yes. Then you get home, you open your refrigerator, and all the same stuff that was in there before is still there, and all of the reasons why you filled your refrigerator with what you filled it with are all still there. So those are nutrients, but it has a consciousness component regarding nutrient choices. And so if we're going to enter into performance from the point of view of nourishment, we're going to get some knowledge. That's for the intellectual self. But then we're going to also have to deal with our choice making, which is our emotional self, to be able to actually get the right nutrients onto the plate, shall we say. So then let's take something else, and let's come in from the emotions regarding having you went to a workshop, you really loved it, and what it said was that you're more of a spiritual being than you are a physical being. And you think, oh, I love that. I love that workshop. I love that workshop leader. I want to have the benefit of that. So how do you get the benefit of realizing your transcendental nature? And by the way, the transcendental self is also the invincible self, because the non-dimensional self can't be harmed. There's nothing that can harm you if you're not a body or a mind. And so we're not going to ask the question, how many lives do I have? I don't know about that. But I do know that there's a quantum presence to my being, and that equates in some way to my transcendental self, or my non-limited by dimension self. And so how am I going to have a realization at the level of practical implementation about my transcendental presence? The part of myself that need not be shy, the part of myself that need not be angry, the part of myself that need not be judgmental, the part of myself which is inherently compassionate. How do I work that one? And the answer is, I have to decide to. And so the heart mind is the bottom line on decision making, of course. And so now I'm in the bank, I'm in the line at the bank, and it's going too slow, and I need to be someplace else, and I'm freaking out, and I'm getting angry and frustrated, and I can't remember that I'm devoting myself to being in an equanimical place no matter what. Because after all, how did the circumstances get created? Either I created the entire world, or everybody in the world is creating the entire world, and I and everybody who created the world created the line that I'm in at the bank. So the whole idea of being angry at that line is, well, in this context, it's actually stupid. So then
Yeah.
let's link this just briefly to the channels and the organs.
Yeah.
So as a doctor of Chinese medicine, I discovered through 35 years of clinical practice that the direct association between organs and emotions is, shall we say, moderate. In other words, it's not a rule. But what I also learned, because I've taught Chinese medicine in Chinese medicine schools, is that as every culture, every shamanic culture, whether it's the Greeks, the Celts, the Druids, the Native Americans, the South Americans, the Africans, the Siberians, the Chinese, everybody else, the Australians, all those indigenous cultures decided that the best way to keep account of the nature of the world is to create a system of associations. So in other words, once they discovered that there were 12 organs, then they went about the business of figuring out how to remember those organs. And so it's like a spreadsheet. You've got the organ over here, and then you've got the emotions here, and you also have the seasons, you have the colors, and all this stuff comes together. And if you look at the Native Americans, same, seasons, colors, associations with, the spring associated with the birth, the summer associated with productivity of a young person and a middle-aged person, the fall associated with a retired person, the winter associated with a person who's transitioning out of this life. That every shamanic culture has that same framework. And so I like the idea. I was originally just mystified by the idea that the organs are associated with the emotions. But what I realized in the end was that what's actually the most associated with the organs and the emotions and the health and well-being is consciousness. So that goes to the heart-mind. And the heart-mind is associated with the element of fire and all that stuff. And we could have a talk about that, but I really want to support the people who are listening to this in having a revelation that while it's mystifying and interesting, the paradigm of the chi channels, and obviously there's chi, and obviously the chi is operating in the body, we're not really positive that where the Chinese drew those lines on those bodies in those books are actually real lines. Nobody's proven that yet. But what we do know is that underlying all of this mythology about channels and organs and emotions, underlying all of that is a very simple concept, which is the integration of the three treasures, and that all of it is going to be based on choices, and those choices are going to be made more or less relative to the level of cultivation and to the level of trauma. So if a person has been horrifically traumatized, it's probably going to require more discipline, more focus, more practice, more support than a person like myself. I mean, I'm moderately traumatized, but I've never been present when someone that I knew was killed. I've never been nearby a bomb going off. And so, and we all, you know, everybody has their kind of relative relationship with trauma, because many people who have hardly any trauma at all are immensely traumatized, and some people who've had lots of trauma are really incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
So in the end, the point that I'm making is that if you think of yourself as a body, a heart, mind, and a transcendental self, then the key, particularly for personal practice, I mean, let your acupuncturist do whatever they want and use whatever paradigm they want to use, because it's never going to be harmful. It's always very positive. But for a personal practitioner, someone who aspires to crack the code, to hack in to eternal life and highest level of performance enhancement possible, it's all going to come down to integrating the body, mind, and spirit, recognizing that they're all there, bringing them into harmony, and the only way that that can be done is through choices.
Wow. So here's a crossroad of choices. I think this is a really good place to stop. And or I'm like, wow, I just have a million questions that I can go in a million different directions. But I think what I'd like to do is literally have this as a place to stop. I do want to ask you like where people can learn more about your books and your
Sure.
programs and stuff, but invite you back, because literally there's tons of different roads I'd like to take this conversation down, but I think they could be their own unique discussions and podcasts, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, let me say one more thing. It's super
Please,
brief. Is
please.
that the easiest first thing is breath practice.
Mhm.
It is very hard to control the mind. It is very hard to control the choices that we make about our eating. It's very hard to manage our sleep if we are worried, because that's just a cortisol trigger. But what we can do is just write this down, put it on those little sticky notes, and
Yeah.
put it on the refrigerator, on the mirror, on the computer, on the mirror of your car, and just simply put one word: breathe. Now there's a whole array of knowledge about breath practice, and a part of Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, Kung Fu is breath practice. So there's miles and miles and piles that we can learn about breath practice. But just modifying the pace and depth of the breath. So as you're going to sleep, say to yourself, modify the pace of my breath. Just something. And we've got a whole program called breath medicine, but just doing something on a regular basis, when you wake up in the morning, same. What are you going to do? Jump out of bed and race to it? No, you're going to lay there for a few minutes at least. Why not take a deep breath? You could adjust your posture a little bit while you're lying there too, and begin to develop the ability to make the choice to do some small thing that you don't usually do. That is the crack that opens all the biohacking and all the neurohacking and all the, energy hacking. It's all about choice making, and the easiest thing is to use what we call breath medicine, but just keep it super simple for today and say, modify the depth and pace of the breath a couple of times a day. When you wake up, takes a couple of minutes. Before you go to sleep, it takes a couple of minutes. Back to you, sir.
That's awesome. No, I love the fact you left people with something to think about and, more importantly, do on a daily basis, both as a discipline, which I think you've already mentioned is a challenge for a lot of people. So it's a good practical discipline, and a tease because I want people to come back and listen to more of our engagement. But even between now and the time we get back together to have more conversations, they can also check out your books, your programs, your other work that you do. Tell us a little bit about where people can find those different things and what you have available to them.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I'm sure that probably some of this is going to show up in the show notes, and I appreciate that. So the Institute of Integral Qigong and Tai Chi, which is a training and research institute, has a website, and it's very simple. It's IIQTC.org. Institute of Integral Qigong and Tai Chi is IIQTC.org. And I just mentioned breath medicine. If you fish around a little bit on that site, you'll find a link to breath medicine. And even the sales page don't even buy the product, just read the sales page. There's a lot of incredible information there. We have what we call the free Qigong library. It's also on that page and probably in the show notes. We have a YouTube page. There's a lot. There's actually one of our YouTube videos has pretty close to 2 million views.
Wow.
And that YouTube page is called put the word the first, Tai Chi, spelled with 2 words, T-A-I, second word C-H-I, and Qigong Way, Q-I-G-O-N-G, Way, the Tai Chi and Qigong Way. There's 40 or 50 videos there. And we could go on. There's one other thing that I wanted to mention. Oh, I've been working with an organization called the Shift Network, a pretty interesting group of people, and I've taught 5 courses for them. And if you go to the Shift Network, actually, if you go to the products page of the IIQTC, there's a click there to click through to the Shift courses, and there's 5 of them. So
That's
lots
awesome.
Lots of cool stuff. And Michael, what a pleasure to know you all these years. And I just want to say Jim Turner out loud, who introduced us, just a profoundly humane human being who has slipped away as a mentor for both of us. And so we've known each other for a couple of years. We've had a few conversations, and I love it that we just keep, coming back together. And, there's a revolution in play here. It has to do with sovereignty and empowerment for individuals to realize how powerful they are. And you're working on it. I'm working on it. And not that we have the expectation that it's going to succeed, because that might be depressing. So we keep our energy high by holding the preference for a positive revolution of human sovereignty, but we don't hold our breath or bang ourselves against any kind of hard walls, because that's not making the right choice.
Well, and I'll speak to just two things really quickly. I think one of the lessons I learned from studying Chinese philosophy, Taoism and Buddhism, is kind of well, especially maybe not Buddhism, it's more the immediacy of the moment, but the long term. Like, we here in the West, especially in the States, is like this quarter, no, this week, no, this day, no, this next 5 minutes. We don't take 50, 100, 250, 250, 500-year views down the road. And I think one of the benefits I've gotten from studying Chinese philosophy is like the long view. Because if you hold a short view and you don't succeed, yes, there's a lot of psychological consequences to that. So I definitely appreciate everything you just said. And for Jim Turner, who I miss dearly, he used Chinese philosophy. He talked about the energetic flows in the culture as part of our transpersonal work. So he was really good at integrating kind of Western philosophical thought and Chinese thought in terms of how he viewed and understood how cultures shift and change and how we can best make policy changes here, at least in the States. So I'm really glad you brought Jim up because, he was a mentor to us both, as you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to our next opportunity,
Yeah.
Michael, and many blessings, waves of blessing chi for you and everybody
Thank
who's
you.
listening.
Thank you, Roger. Great to see you, my friend.
Blue and sea. Nothing in between us and love. Nothing in between